stock, whenever you're that big and that strong and have grown that fast, people start to look at things that might happen in the future, even with high profit margins, even with market dominance. What if things get frosty between the U.S. and China when it comes to chips, especially with the AI market as strong as it is? That could hurt Nvidia.
Hi, and welcome to the Silicon Insider Podcast. Hey, Scott, how are you?
I'm good, Mike. Happy midweek to you.
Yes, you're home, not in your suit. It's good to see you in your civvies.
Well, whenever you and I talk, it's either after I'm all done or before I start. And so today, it's one of the early days. It's before I start. So who knows where the day will go, but we'll start with this, which is great.
Well, we had quite a week on the stock market this week, especially with one particular company. Uh, the BBC interviewed me on Tuesday night saying, "What's going on with Nvidia?" And they informed me that it had suffered the largest one-day loss in a stock in history, which is $279 billion. And I hasten to point out to them that given a denominator of 3 trillion, that's not as bad as it looks. Nevertheless, that's a lot of money. That's a 10% drop in the stock. I know CEO Jensen Huang lost $10 billion that day. I'm not sure he's too concerned about that, but quite a number. What do you think?
Nvidia is at such a precipice at this point. You mentioned the $3 trillion market cap. They now hold at least the top two individual day market cap gains in history, beating out Meta and the likes of Apple and things like that. And so it makes sense that they also hold the biggest single day drop. And each one of those figures is very near $300 billion. And so that's how much a stock moves on a good day, on a bad day, when you're that high. And it's
Well, you have made the point consistently that when you're the number one company in the world, you have to be perfect.
right.
And any slight deviation from perfection, you're going to get punished big. Any other
Right.
company any other company loses just a little bit of their profit margin. Okay, so they lose 2 or 3 points. Not Nvidia. Nvidia can't make a single wrong step without getting an enormous amount of punishment.
Yeah. And if you're a long-term investor, you're really not paying attention to the quarterly earnings all that much, especially when they come in just strength after strength after strength. And any other company, would have had a really good quarter. Nvidia reports they beat on all places pretty much. They are still making money hand over fist. They're still dominating the AI chip industry to the point where, companies that very recently were much bigger than them are now tiny and losing market value. So Nvidia, after a really good dominating quarter, drops 10%, drops $300 billion. And that's just sort of the way these things go. I don't think there's a way that this goes any other way, just because of the, I guess, psychology at this point is what they're dealing with as much as performance and actual numbers.
Well, I was looking into performance. And by the way, by Thursday, while the market was falling, Nvidia was climbing again. So, the people are coming back in. I was looking for any kind of empirical data that suggested why people are getting real nervous about Nvidia. And by the way, one of the reasons the stock went up today is because everybody's waiting to hear from Broadcom, Nvidia's competitor, to see what kind of numbers they have. But it looks like Broadcom's got pretty good numbers too, and that helped. But at the heart of it is Nvidia's its profit margin has traditionally been high 50s to low 60s%. The last few months, 75%. And so people are saying, well, okay, if its value is 3 trillion, it's 75% profit margins, and it just fell. I think it fell by 2%, 2 percentage points, to like 72%. does that mean the company's going to go back to its original profit margin? And this was just a fluke because of the huge demand. And I think that's affecting the stock price.
Even more than that is just sort of what you said at the top. Whenever you're that big and that strong and have grown that fast, people start to look at things that might happen in the future, even with high profit margins, even with market dominance. What if things get frosty between the US and China when it comes to chips, especially with the AI market as strong as it is? That could hurt Nvidia. There are little ways that could chip away at this company's dominance. Not to mention the fact that other companies are coming for it, and that's a natural, good for consumer sort of thing to happen. And so, to make a long-term statement on Nvidia, I think we just need more of a long-term here. I mean, if they were to drop to $2.5 trillion market value, everyone would say, "Holy Toledo, they just lost $500 billion." But yeah, what do they have? What business do they have being a $2.5 trillion company? I mean, AI is just nuts. I think you look around at, I think, the bigger picture, which is AI startups are starting to have people peel off and start other companies with giant market valuations even before those startups have gone public, not to mention even proven that they can be profitable. It used to be you went from a big company, cashed in your stock and then started something smaller. These people are leaving startups to start other companies with giant valuations, and nowhere along the chain are any of these startups profitable yet. That's real craziness right there.
Yeah, that's 2001 .com bubble stuff.
Yeah.
We got the SEC now saying, "Oh, we're going to look into Nvidia." Every time we've seen this so many times over the last 40 years, every time a tech company takes off because it has an innovative advantage over everybody else, and it gets very, very wealthy and powerful, all of a sudden the calls are, "We've got to stop it because it's a monopoly." I can remember interviewing people saying, "Is anyone ever going to stop Microsoft?" This was during Windows. And right now, as you and I both know, there are scores of AI companies starting up out there. They're taking on every corner of the market, and one or two of them are going to break out, and they're going to really challenge Nvidia. It might even be Broadcom, might be AMD. It's coming, and this hysteria, it's just got to be tempered. And the government saying, "Oh, something must be done," and senators are saying, "Oh my gosh, they're too big." Every time we hear too big, that's usually a sign the company is going to start getting smaller without government intervention. So, I mean, let's see what happens. So, do you look at the job numbers that just came out? They're coming out tomorrow. But as we're talking, we have
right as we're talking, we're one day ahead of the big job report for August, but we do have some of the preliminary figures, and they show some, I think I'd call it trepidation in hiring. The job numbers, yes, the hiring numbers are lower. The layoff numbers over the last month and so far this year are higher. And I think, it all sort of fits into what we've seen thematically over the last couple of months. Everything is slower. Yeah. Price growth is even slower. And I guess I would ask the question, isn't this ultimately what the Federal Reserve wanted? And now they're talking interest rate cuts. And I think the question to be asked is, if the Federal Reserve did this right, in other words, yeah, we see a slowdown, but we also see a slowdown in inflation, which was the goal. Right. Were too many jobs lost? Is the economy hit too hard? Isn't that the question as to how well they threaded that needle?
Yeah, the Fed always seems to be trying to dial it in after it's occurred, and they're always behind. And we're getting weird contradictory numbers too, like jobless claims are also down. Okay, so is that a good sign that the economy's thrumming along fine, but new jobs are also down? So we're trying to cool the economy down, that's overheated from inflation, but are we now tipping? We seem to be more and more numbers, indicators seem to be tipping towards some kind of recession and not just necessarily a soft landing. But they're still contradictory. It's the market's doing, market has a few ups and downs, but on the whole, the stock market's doing great. How's small business in America? Well, look like they're in a little bit of trouble. Inventories and manufacturing quantities, that kind of thing. So we're still in this weird interregnum between, I don't know what, I mean, crazy times and bad times, okay times, heading into an election, which makes it even crazier because literally this election could turn on the last week if the market goes one way or another. Because everybody,
I don't know that
economy.
Right. My only pushback would be I wouldn't say that it makes it even crazier. I'd say it makes it even more important. And that's why people are really looking at these numbers. You've got a party in office that's been in office for 4 years, the Democrats. They've struggled with inflation. It looks like they may have tamed inflation, but at what cost? You have a party running again, the Republicans, that are able to pull some stats, hey, whoa, job growth is slowing. Prices have been high. And those are legitimate concerns. I mean, two of the biggest legitimate concerns of people going into an election. On the other hand, the Democrats would say, wow, but look at the, either the stock market or the overall economy. The job numbers are overall looking strong. And by the way, we've ushered in this boom of AI, which is the next hot thing. And everybody likes to, sort of plant a flag on that. So I think people are going to be watching, as you say, a lot of these economic numbers really closely up until election day, because now we don't have all or nothing on one side or another. You've got your people who are saying, wow, overall, we're good. Okay, but tell that to someone out of work and really struggling to meet the grocery bill. But then on the other hand, people will say, oh, the economy's terrible, this Harris economy. Well, wait a minute. Our economy has rarely been this strong as a country. So you can sort of make the claim on both sides. And I think that is why people will be watching every little stat, and throw in maybe a 50 basis point interest rate cut people are talking later this month. Who knows what that will mean to both the market and to people's purchasing power.
That was going to be my next topic, which is a lot seems to depend all of a sudden in 2 weeks on the Fed September meeting. Now, they were talking 25 basis points, but now I'm starting to hear, given some of these recent numbers, 50 basis points, that's a big move right before an election. I mean, the Fed is traditionally unbelievably conservative, but this almost is a de facto radical move. And they may not have any choice. They may feel like they have to do this no matter what, political season it is, that 50 or even more. What do you think?
Maybe. I don't know that the Fed feels it has to do anything. They've been consistently really conservative, and I just mean slow moving, which, if you think about it in the context of an overall economy, is not necessarily a bad thing.
I kind of like the Fed being conservative. I really do.
Yeah, so they are hesitant, in other words, to take big steps. And so I don't know if they make a big cut right away or a small cut. But one thing we have learned is, remember that big 1,000-point, 1,100-point Dow drop, and people said, well, we blew it. We missed our window. We need to emergency cut interest rates. And then what happened? The Dow turned around and went up about 2,000, 2,500 points. Yeah. So we're not in a prolonged rut, nor are we in a prolonged place where people are saying, oh, we don't have to cut anymore. I think there is the feeling we've got we're darn near 100% sure of a cut. But what it is and what follows it, I don't know anymore. And that's because overall our economy is strong. At the same time, the reason that it's strong, i.e. consumers are still willing to spend, consumers are still spending a lot of money and saying, whoa, inflation is still here. And isn't that the Fed's job to try to cut back on that?
So you're not going to go to Vegas and put some money down on how much the Fed's going to bump the...
Shockingly, I won't be putting money on what the Federal Reserve does later this month. No.
I'm sure you can make a wager down there. You can make it on anything. Why not on the Fed?
Right. That would be a real sexy bet. Like everyone's talking about football and what's going to happen. And you're like, I'd like to bet on the Federal Reserve's next move. I don't think so.
Okay, next Monday, Apple Computer. While the rest of the tech stocks were in trouble this week and slowly coming back, Apple had a good week. Stock up 1%, all in expectation of next Monday. What are your thoughts? Are you going to be covering it? I'm sure you are.
Yeah, I'll be there at headquarters when they roll out their expected iPhone 16. I think the reason investors have been so high on Apple, no matter what the rest of the economy is doing, is sort of that AI bubble. I think people expect this to be the first real consumer device that has AI embedded. And by consumer, I mean one that hundreds of millions of people have in their pockets and pocketbooks. How Apple pulls this off is something I'll be watching very closely because I'm a skeptic as to how AI plays into our daily lives as consumers. I just don't really see it. It seems to be an important tool, but an important tool for back-end business. And I think that's where the money is made. And I realize that's not as sexy and exciting, but it'll be interesting to see what Apple does because of the last event it really teased, hey, we're using OpenAI, we're using our own Apple intelligence. We're going to put this thing in the phones and other devices. And, if that just means a stronger Siri, okay. I'm curious how AI can be used in our daily lives where it won't feel intrusive. I just want to see what they do because if anyone can consumerize something, it's Apple, right?
Yeah, well, we have Google doing gems, which it all seemed kind of small ball. I have to admit, it seemed, and I don't know if Apple's had enough time with OpenAI to really do anything big and flashy, but I can see small apps, small AI apps improving a lot of performance in various activities we do in our daily life, like, helping us correct sentences and spell words or come up real quickly with, comparative prices and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I could see it being a friend, not, a god, but I could see down the line Apple going way deep, with AI. But right now I get the feeling it's just going to be make your life a little bit better. And it's worth the price of getting a new iPhone if it can do that for you, I think.
Yeah, maybe so. And actually what you just said is interesting to me. It gives me something else to look for because the thing that impressed me the most about the iPhone world was not the hardware itself, but the App Store and how that changed everything. I mean, you created entire companies, entire industries. And maybe that's where AI makes its mark is in some of these apps. That's an interesting thing. And if you open up the App Store to the AI companies or to the other companies, how they're using AI, that could be, gosh, what a vein of profit and productivity that could be, and both for Apple and for these companies. So maybe that's how it becomes a consumer device. I think when you said small ball, if I had to describe my reaction to AI so far, I think it would be those two words. I'm just not impressed. And these $100 billion valuations for startups, I mean, where's the proof in the pudding? We just haven't seen it to me. And so at least not on the consumer level. So I think Apple's move could be something really significant in whether or not AI goes forward as this super hot, super important thing.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think the accumulation of valuable tools, apps, could be the killer app. It may be we just look up and realize that we got AI doing a lot of our stuff and we haven't even noticed because it's so hidden and transparent that our life just got a lot better. That may be the future of AI for the next 10 years. The killer app may be out there, the cyber brain, but right now it just may be, wow, things are a hell of a lot more efficient all of a sudden. That would be enough, I think, to drive Nvidia to new levels in the stratosphere, along with all the other AI companies.
It could, because if Apple needs it and needs NVIDIA's chips, yeah, you're right. That would be a pretty major major customer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a moment of silence for poor Intel. In May, they announced they were going to lay off 15,000 people. We finally have some of the numbers. I guess the layoffs will be occurring uh, in October. The company filed a notice with the state of California. It's going to lay off 54 jobs in most of them based in Santa Clara. I keep waiting for good news from Intel. I mean, they've been spending billions and billions of dollars trying to advance their technology and regain their place out there. And this just looks like more bad news. I guess the layoffs are October 31st.
Yeah, I mean, I say this with a lot of respect, Mike, but no one besides you is talking about Intel these days, and that's got to tell you something. I
Yeah.
mean, whenever Intel is on CNBC, it's someone saying, "What? A market cap below $100 billion?" I mean, Intel, they missed the boat again, and this isn't the first time, and it's become a pattern. And you know, when your industry becomes the hot thing and you're the big kahuna in the industry and you're unable to take part for whatever reason, that is kind of a death sentence for a lot of companies. And
Yeah.
Intel has just lost relevance, and we can talk about this. But again, we'd be the only people talking about this. I
Yeah.
mean,
No,
Intel is just not in the
there's still an
conversation.
awful lot of intellectual capital over there, not to mention intellectual property. And it's got to be at the top because you set that company in the right direction, it would turn itself around. I mean, even HP is starting to reappear out there, and that company was, gutted. So, companies, Microsoft, remember we were writing Microsoft off a couple of years ago? Companies can turn around if they can retain their intellectual capital, the people, but it also has to have great leadership. And I'm
You
beginning to
have
think
to
a failure of leadership.
Right. You have to show up where the action is. I mean,
Yeah.
Microsoft is a perfect example. Remember back in the 80s and 90s and even 2000s, it was Wintel. Like those two companies were the big ones. If you needed a company that was bigger than Intel, you'd say Microsoft. And they pivoted and they made it in mobile, they made it in AI. They're now in the top three. Another company that's super old and super gigantic is Apple. They obviously pivoted to mobile. They
Great.
created a whole
Better than
category,
anything
and
in history.
right. And now they're in AI, they're number one. Amazon, another company that's no spring chicken, they have a big stake in Anthropic. They're in the AI game. These are really big companies that manage to turn their ship in the right direction. And so there's no excuse for Intel,
No.
especially given that, I mean, goodness, chip stocks are hot, chip equipment stocks are hot. There's no point in history where you would use that sentence and absolutely not include Intel. And now that's the case. And that's a humongous miss. I don't, it's just a huge miss.
So do we see an acquisition soon? I don't think we see a bankruptcy soon, but
No,
that's an awful lot of big facilities, including one just given to them by the Biden administration out there. Do you just buy Intel?
you mean if you're another company? I don't know why you'd want to do that because the big zombie companies are rarely good buys. Just ask
Yeah, no, I'm
AMAC.
talking about because you buy the fabs.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Intel stokes a little bit of interest by announcing, hey, we're splitting into two companies, and I don't know, neither of them would be all that successful, but at least something.
What would they be? I
Right.
can't imagine.
Or go the GE route. And GE was fighting for its life and it just started selling everything it could. And
Yeah,
at least then you had a lot of cash and you had less debt because you got a lot of
that's how Motorola came back. It had
right.
all the patents in chips, and they sued everybody in sight. And literally, patent judgments was the main source of Motorola's revenues for several years. Not
Hey,
products, not radios, not
right.
chips, suing
I'll
people.
I'll do you one even more old school and say Ampex. Remember how they
Yeah.
were off the map and then they started suing for IP and all of a sudden they had a stock price again and a little bit of action and then it didn't work for that
And
long because that's not a long-term strategy.
But the fate of it was it's now just a neon sign on the freeway.
They even took that down. I can go on forever on that, but I made an entire documentary on that. But yeah, it's it's a way back. I don't know that Intel could go that route, nor does it need to go that route, but it's certainly not too big to fail. It proves that over and over again. And
Yeah.
I don't know what kept it from pivoting in the right direction, like many of its gigantic peers who are now
Right.
literally the top valuable companies in the entire world.
In history.
Right. And Intel has a market cap that's like 1/10 of Tesla. So come on.
Yeah. Okay. Finally, Verizon. This is an interesting story. Years ago, Verizon was selling off a lot of its fiber optic lines, and one of them was Frontier Communications. I don't remember what they paid. They sold it for, but now they've just bought it back for $9.6 billion. And one of the advantages of it, Frontier has 2 million fiber optic connections in 25 states. And if they fold it into Verizon, it'll make it up to 10 million. And will that bring down costs for us fees who use Verizon? Probably not. Will it improve performance? Yeah, you hope so. But I just like the idea of you sell off a company for a bunch of money and then you turn around and pay even more for it to bring it back in the fold. What do you think?
Verizon is one of those companies, and we bring up some of these old names that are just kind of done. Yahoo, and I don't know. It's hard to follow these guys because my job is literally to tell people what is relevant. And I don't mean this as a slap, but some of these companies just aren't in the conversation anymore. And
they're not exciting, but in daily lives of people,
people pay Verizon their bills, and Verizon keeps the Wi-Fi going, and that's a good relationship that keeps people employed. And full stop. That's important, but it's not changing the world. But right, as long as they're around and people can still do those things, it serves a purpose. I get it. But isn't that the risk of any carrier? And that's why some carriers are trying to become cable companies. Cable companies are trying to become networks, and they're trying to become movie studios who are trying to become, carriers. And it's all how to stay relevant in a world that is mobile and streaming, and phones are now commodities, and therefore your carrier is kind of a commodity too.
Yeah. Well, I'm bringing it up because if you're on something like Verizon, let's say if you go to a website all the time and it's not there one day, you go, what the hell happened? If your Verizon goes down, you're storming around the house screaming, son of a bitch, what happened to the cable?
Right.
and then you got to go to Starbucks with your laptop and everything else. So I just thought I'd tell people that it's now 20% bigger, and hopefully that improves their performance.
Yeah, I'll refrain from comment because I work for a cable company, but I don't have to tell you that how we do on those consumer surveys, obviously.
Okay, well, that's it for now, folks. You can find us on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. You can see Scott on Facebook and X, and of course, almost every weeknight on NBC Bay Area. And you can hear me regularly on it's going to be even more regular on the BBC radio show Business Matters. If you happen to be in Tanzania next week, have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.